schema is one that commonly you can't actually treat just within the therapeutic relationship. It's one that needs some work outside of the therapeutic relationship. And in fact, group schema therapy is really good for this particular schema. Of course, I'm talking about social isolation. I'm Rita Younan. Welcome to 7 Minute Schemas.
And I'm Ruth Holt. We're working our way through all 18 of the maladaptive schemas that are part of schema therapy. We're both advanced level schema therapists, and we're using this series to help therapists really understand each of the individual schemas, what it feels like in the room, some treatment ideas, and some tips and tricks for working with all sorts of schemas. But today we are talking about that feeling, that sense, that perspective of yourself that says, I don't belong, I don't fit, I'm isolated, I'm not part of anything, and I can't be part of anything often. And that, I think, social isolation or alienation schema can present in the room in lots of different ways. But as Rita was just saying, it's something that we also need to help our clients do work on outside of the therapy room.
Might be worth just talking a little bit about some of the ways in which this schema can be shaped, because it's not as clear cut as what it may seem. So one possible avenue is that you may have patients that had extensive bullying throughout their lifetime, with the primary school, high school, and then what happens is it might get activated if there's some systemic bullying within the workplace or something to that effect. Jeff really talks about the fact that social isolation, Jeff Young that is, usually occurs outside of the family. So it's peer related in some way, or perhaps there is something unique about your family that makes you very different to outside families, and you start to kind of notice that, you know, perhaps your family is really neglectful, there's lots of abuse, there's alcohol, etc. And so you find yourself feeling different to other people.
Or you could have situations, you know, that are even more systemic, you know, people who are from ethnic minorities or from backgrounds where those types of facial features, languages make them an outsider. So you can have that larger cultural issue going on. You can also have, you know, children who maybe are gifted, maybe are quite clever, quite able, and are put up a few grades, or feel different in some way, maybe have some learning difficulties, or may have different orientation issues going on for them that really make them feel like they are not part of the group.
And just touching on this idea that social isolation is usually kind of peer related or something that happens outside of the family. Just recently, Pam Pilkington and I did a systematic review looking at adverse childhood experiences and subsequent schemas in adult life. And what we found was the social isolation schema had a strong relationship with maternal insensitivity, which is quite interesting. So for those individuals who reported that their perception was that mum was not very attuned, wasn't very kind of aware of their emotional well-being, that they developed this social isolation schema, feeling different, feeling as though they can't relate to people. And clinically, I'm not sure if this has happened for you, Ruth, what I've noticed is that social isolation usually does belong or kind of is connected to schemas like abandonment and emotional deprivation. That, you know, for example, social anxiety disorder, one would assume that it would just be social isolation schema that would fuel that axis 1 disorder, but in fact sometimes it's the fear of abandonment that they're concerned about with the social anxiety disorder.
And that gives us, you know, really rich ideas for imagery work. We can go back in imagery and, you know, confront those situations. We can help our clients to feel the anger that is appropriate anger for being excluded, for being bullied, that they can, you know, have a sense that what happened wasn't right. And often that can be for the first time for these clients, that they may have felt that there's something different about me, that there's something that I don't fit, rather than actually that person had their own issues and they made me feel that way. So I think it can be good for reattributing their sense of alienation. But it can also be, I think, helpful to get clients to grieve some of the injustice and the distress that they maybe didn't have a chance to grieve growing up. So, you know, I think imagery can be really powerful, but we also need to really make sure that for these clients, they learn how to find their tribe, right? That's one thing they have not been able to do. And, you know, with the internet, with other resources that they now have as adults, we want to encourage them to not keep perpetuating this schema by avoiding, you know, these clients have very strong avoidant protectors. They find it very hard to kind of reach out. So we need to really start that earlier in this work with this schema than we might do with some of the other schemas.
Absolutely, Ruth. That's a really important note. Just really starting to encourage some behavioural experiments, if you like, or behavioural pattern breaking, where they start to immerse themselves in some kind of social community where there's a sense of belonging. One of the things with this schema, and what I've done with a lot of my patients to help them overcome this schema, is noticing when they belong. Obviously, schemas distort our perception of what we pay attention to. And so, you know, when they're in situations where they automatically perceive themselves as not belonging, starting to really jot down and pay attention to the evidence that is contrary to the schema, it really makes quite a significant difference.
And I think it's also useful, you know, to have perhaps a partner session or get some outside feedback for what is going on, because we can't always tell if we're just in that one-on-one relationship, what's happening outside that therapy room. So, you know, I've had clients who, you know, we've actually role played how they enter a room, how they start those conversations. And I can start to pick up that they're quite reserved, that they're quite fearful, or they might be doing something they're not aware of. Because again, if they've felt isolated for a very long time, they may have missed some of those social skills developments that are really crucial to overcoming this schema. So we want to work on those things, bring partners in, help them to start to learn to feel those feelings of acceptance and love. So there's lots more to be said, Rita, but that's the end of our 7 minutes. So for those who'd like to find out more information and develop their schema therapy skills further, there's the link at the end of this video to give you more ideas about training.